Welcome to the Jeff Crilley Show. And now, here's Jeff Crilley.
Beautiful, almost spring morning. It sure feels like spring. I know we're 2 weeks away. I'm Jeff Crilley. Welcome to the Jeff Crilley Show. We've got a jam-packed show, and we are just going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about Campaign 2016 and millennials. And my first guest is Audrea Taylor, and she is with an organization called I'mTomorrow.com. Well, Audrea, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so people can check you out. I'm Tomorrow is spelled.
I am the number 2, MORO.com. It's spelled like you would text it.
Absolutely. And check you out on Facebook in the same way. So let's talk about millennials. Is your generation passionate about this election?
You know, it's really interesting to look at millennials because for the first time in history, we're the largest generation to date. And so a lot of politicians are really playing for this millennial vote. I would say that overall, we're not passionate about politics. We don't care. We're apathetic. But there are some candidates that are really messaging in a unique way to millennials right now. And so we are seeing that. Millennials care about the issues. We care about things that directly affect our lives and affect our communities, but it doesn't always play out in politics.
So let's talk about that a little bit. We were visiting before the show, and we were remarking that Bernie Sanders has done a brilliant job connecting with millennials. What's Bernie Sanders doing right?
I think what Bernie Sanders is doing is he is speaking a language that is centered around morality. And he's messaging to millennials in a way that communicating this is the right way to do things. And this is the moral way that we should do business. This is the moral way our country should operate. And he's done that by going after Wall Street and a lot of big companies, big money, and communicated a message that there's a moral route that's different than the one he thinks our country's taking. Whether or not that's truth or rooted in principle is debated, but one thing I will say to Bernie Sanders' credit is that he understands the importance of the millennial vote.
Yes.
And there's many politicians in the race right now that are not messaging to millennials, specifically in the Republican Party. And they need to realize that if they want to continue, if they want to win elections, they're going to have to win the millennial vote.
I want to hear your story. So how did this all begin for you?
So I started in 2008 with the presidential campaign then, and I was 13 at the time and went door to door campaigning during that election. And then in 2010, launched a nonprofit, I'm Tomorrow. And it was really centered around the idea of we're millennials that needed a platform to express our views. And there's very few millennials that are talking about these issues, but we care. And as I was talking with my friends, I realized that we have opinions that do matter, and we're the ones that are going to be directly affected by the decisions that are being made today. And so let's start talking about what we think this should look like. Let's start discussing this. And so it looked like a Liberty discussion group in our home that was about 50 or 60 people showing up every week to talk about this. And it evolved into public speaking all over the state of California and all over the country. We've spoken to about 100,000 people and launched videos reaching over 1.3 million views and realized that we have a voice. Millennials have a voice that needs to be heard at this important time in our country.
And so your nonprofit, it's designed to message to millennials, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's kind of twofold. One, it's a source for millennials to go to find information on the important matters and important issues of the day. And the second thing is it's a platform for millennials to have their voice heard. And so one thing that we're doing right now is we have an initiative called Church Be Known, and we've just launched it. And essentially what it is we have millennials all over the country in their communities that are speaking in their churches and in their local spheres of influence.
Right.
And so what we do is we kind of help train and equip those millennials and provide them with the information and the tools they need. And a lot of these they're really just articulate, well-spoken millennials who have a lot of influence in their communities, but just weren't utilizing it.
Well, I think you're brilliant because I believe every generation kind of rejects their parents' values in a way. I mean, think about what happened in the 60s is you had the peace, love generation. And then I graduated high school in 81. and you had the movie Wall Street, where greed is good, right?
Yep.
And my kids, your generation, are the kind of I want to work for something that stands for something.
Oh, that's exactly right. And we're seeing more than any other generation, millennials are volunteering in higher numbers. More millennials volunteer in their 20s and 30s than any generation before us, according to the Huffington Post. And it's interesting to see that millennials have this massive compassion element. 75% say they want to work at a nonprofit. We give more than any generation before us. And to your point, that's exactly it. We want to make a difference.
So if you were to advise the Republican Party on how to reach your generation, what would you be telling them?
I would ask them to cast a vision for millennials. And I think campaigns that have won in the past and politicians that have been successful cast a vision for millennials. For Bernie Sanders, it has been, let's be a moral nation. Let's bring morals back. For other campaigns, for Reagan, it's morning in America. And it's a very futurist way of talking and thinking. And Obama did this too with campaign slogans like forward and hope and change. And so I want to know from all of the candidates on the right and the left, what's your vision? What's your hope for the next generation? What does your America look like in an ideal world? What will you leave to the next generation? And I think that politicians can do a better job of speaking to that and less attacks, less policies. Millennials, in a lot of ways, want to be sold on a vision.
Yes. Well, the truth is about young voters, and this is not a knock on your generation, but when I was in college, we weren't good at voting when I was in college. So how do you go about getting this new voter to use their American right and duty and cast a ballot and be a part of the process?
What we're doing right now with this Church Be Known movement is we are going through examples in history of when the church was known in culture for taking a stand. And there's numerous examples of this. I'll just share a couple with you. One is when Hitler was on the rise in Germany and he started pushing beliefs of racial superiority from the pulpits. And there was a group of churches that didn't comply, and they became known as the Confessing Church. And that was their stand. That was what their responsibility was for their time in history. There was other groups. We look at William Wilberforce and we talk about him, but we fail to recognize the fact that there was a group behind him called the Claflin sect that really formed and birthed William Wilberforce and that helped him pass emancipation in 1833. And so these are just a couple examples of generations in history that answered their call. And our call in America is unique. It's different. We don't face the same struggles that a lot of people around the world do. Ours is simple. Every 4 years, sometimes every 2 years, we have the responsibility and the privilege to vote. And so one of the things we're doing right now with millennials is we're telling the stories of when, votes made a difference throughout history, and we're telling the stories of generations that answered the call, and we're asking our generation to be known at this time.
My guest right now, Audrea Taylor, imtomorrow.com is her website. That's IM2 Morrow, MORO.com. So let's talk about getting the millennials out to vote. And are the politicians on the campuses? Are they writing off this generation, saying, you know what, my time is valuable. I'm not going to spend too much time on college campuses because they don't vote. I'm just going to stay with the older voters.
It's interesting. I think that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton have done a better job reaching out to millennials than the right has. But there are a few candidates on the right that are really making an effort to do that. Obviously, candidates are speaking on college campuses. I think a lot of millennials wonder if it's really because they care about our vote or if it's because they care about the endorsements that come from a lot of those universities. We look at Liberty University and the endorsement of Jerry Falwell, and a lot of people think, did he really care about millennials or was it more about endorsements? But there are some candidates that are taking significant amount of airtime through media outlets to communicate to millennials. One of those is Marco Rubio, and we saw just a couple nights ago in his debate, part of his closing statement and part of the time he took out of his debate was to communicate to millennials. And he said, I believe you can be the greatest generation in over 100 years. And it was a really smart messaging because he's playing to the fact that he knows millennials want to make a difference and he knows we want to leave a mark on history. And so he's saying, I believe we can do it and we can do it together. And so there are a few candidates that are starting to message in that way, which is interesting. I think a lot of it's happening on social media for sure.
Absolutely. And I think advertisers have struggled with how do we reach this next generation. I like to say that your generation is probably the most skeptical that's ever come about. You know, my daughter is 26 and she would much rather buy something based on a recommendation from a friend on Facebook
Absolutely.
than anything that Abercrombie and Fitch can create, right? So the politicians really have to be careful about how they market to you because it can backfire.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when it comes to politics, we're tired of the bickering. We're tired of the lies. We want authenticity. We want honesty. We want people that speak truthfully and communicate in a clear way. And we're tired of politicians that avoid answers. And so a lot of that has translated into apathy for sure. But because of millennials' great compassion element, I think that there's still hope that millennials do become politically involved. We do still care. We just need someone to connect the dots of how our compassion relates to politics and the civic sphere.
When you talk to your friends about this, do they roll their eyes or are they engaged? I mean, do you feel like you're wanting to shake people and say, why are you not voting?
No, that's where I'm so encouraged. Okay. I have found that no matter who I sit down with, even if it's a very apathetic millennial, when we sit down and talk about what issues matter to them and how we think that, they relate to politics, most of them say, gosh, you're right. I didn't think about it that way, and I don't want to care. And I will tell you, I don't like politics. It's a dirty process, but we recognize that it's one of the best ways to affect change in our country. And so when the dots are connected for millennials of how their compassion relates to civic involvement and voting, most millennials become involved. And that's what's really exciting. And I would say to a lot of people that aren't millennials, know that there is hope for millennials to transform and to change from being apathetic to being involved. And when that happens, we will become the most powerful force in America today.
Wow, what a great segment. Okay, give us your website one more time. How can people get involved?
Yeah, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, and our website is I'm Tomorrow. It's spelled IM2MORO.com, and that's the same for Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the Jeff Crilley Show.
Great.
When we come back, a man who is changing the tourism industry through online virtual games. The story of GeoWiz is just ahead.
More of the Jeff Crilley Show coming up.